The text widget is similar to the entry widget, except that instead of just entering a single line of input, it creates a multi-line area for text entry. This makes it useful for things like surveys and comment boxes that require free-form text input from the user, or for things like a logging window that needs to output many lines of information for the user and will extend long enough to require a scroll bar to navigate. The text widget is a very powerful and complex widget which can be used for everything from creating that simple logging window to an interactive code editor such as Idle. In this video and the next, we'll cover some of the most common uses and features of the text widget. However, we won't be able to cover everything it's capable of doing. If you're interested in learning about all of the rich set of features available for the text widget, then I highly recommend reading through the TK documentation page for it. The first thing I'm going to do is import the TK-Enter package. However, I'm not going to import the themed TTK module because the text widget is not a themed widget. I also need to create a top-level window using the TK constructor method. And now to create my text widget, I'll use the text constructor. Notice there's no TTK because it's not a themed module. I'll pass in that root window as the parent, and then I'm going to configure two properties, one for the width and the other for the height of my text box. Width and height are specified in the number of characters tall and the number of characters wide that my text box will be. So when I add it to my top level window using the pat command, you'll see it's now 40 characters wide and 10 characters tall. Even though the text box is only 40 characters wide and 10 characters tall, it can still contain arbitrarily large amounts of information. So if I typed a really long message in here, so this is a long message in the text box, which is more than 40 characters. You notice it wrapped around and it'll continue on to multiple lines. And if I typed a message down here near the bottom, which ran onto another line, this message hits the bottom of the text box. It will run off the screen. You notice that the text box shifted down and continued adding the text below it, but the text above still exists there. By default, the text box wraps text exactly at the end of each line, which can give you the effect of it wrapping in the middle of words, such as here, where it wrapped in the middle of the word text, and up here, where it wrapped in the middle of the word which. We can control where the text box will wrap by configuring the wrap property. We use the config method to do that. And there's three options for wrap. There's one which is care, and that's the default option we see here, where it'll wrap at the character which hits the end of the line. We also have an option for none, which will cause no wrapping. And we have an option for word, which will cause the text box to wrap at the spaces between words. So if I select that, you'll notice that it no longer breaks up my words. It'll wrap at the nearest space. The text widget has get, insert, and delete methods, which work similar to the methods for the entry widget. The get method, for example, requires one or two input parameters, which are the indices of a place in the text. If given one parameter, it will return the character at that index, and if given two parameters, it'll return the string of characters between those indices. However, unlike the single-line entry widget, which can index characters with just a single number, the text widget needs to index characters across multiple lines, which is effectively a two-dimensional space. To accomplish this, it accepts indice arguments of specially formatted strings. The syntax includes a base, which gives a starting point for reference, and 0 or more optional modifiers, which adjust that index from the starting point. There are many different ways to build these index strings, but for this course, I'm going to focus on the most common. For the base, a common format is to use the line.char, where line and char are replaced with the index numbers of the line and character you wish to index. For example, 4.2 would refer to the position in front of character 2 on line 4. Keep in mind that lines are numbered starting with 1 and characters are numbered starting with 0. This is done to keep in line with historical programming conventions. So the base 1.0 would refer to the position at the beginning of the text box. Another common base term is end. When used by itself, it refers to the position after the last character in the whole text box. When used in conjunction with a line, using the syntax line number dot end, it refers to the position after the last character in that line. When we refer to lines here, it's important to understand that I'm referring to logical lines, not display lines. Keep in mind that logical lines, which always end with the invisible new line character, may be different than the lines that are displayed in the text widget due to word wrapping. In addition to the base index, we can also add optional modifiers to the expression. Plus or minus a number of chars or lines is commonly used to increment or decrement the character that's being indexed from the base. We can also use the line start or line end modifiers to move the pointer to the start or end of the currently indexed line. Similarly, the word start and word end modifiers will move the pointer to the start or end of the word that's currently indexed. You can string together as many of these modifiers as you need to, and they'll be evaluated in order from the left to the right. I've just touched on some of the most common index bases and modifiers, but there are many other complex ways to express indices. If you want to learn more about that, I recommend looking at the indices section of the TK documentation for the text widget. We can use the get method of the text widget with these indices by passing them in as strings. So if I call text.get, I'll pass the first index of the start of the area I want to get. So I'll use 1.0, which represents the beginning of my text box. And then I'll enter the end index of the section I want to get. In this case, end. This will return the entire contents of the text widget from beginning to end. You notice that as it does it, the new lines are included as well, and idle displays them as /n characters. If I wanted to get the contents of just the first line, I could do so by typing text.get, start with the index of the beginning of the first line, which is 1.0, and then go to the index at the end of the first line using 1.end. You can see this retrieves all of the information from that first logical line of the text. So even though this message is spread across two lines in the widget because of word wrapping, there's only one new line character at the end, and so that's one logical line. To insert text into the text widget, I'll use the insert method, which takes two parameters. The first parameter is the index at which to insert. So I'm going to create an index here using 1.0 as my base, and then I'm going to add an additional modifier to that of 2 lines. So this creates an index starting from the first position in the text entry field down 2 additional logical lines, which will place this right there. And then I enter the text I want to insert. So I'll say inserted message. And when I execute that, you notice it inserts it at the position down 2 lines from the start of the text entry field. We can also insert a multi-line message by using the /n new line character within the message that we're inserting. So let me insert a message to the end of the message we just inserted a moment ago. I'll use 1.0. I'm going to add the modifier again of going down 2 lines. So I'm looking at the third line down. And then I'm going to add another modifier of line end. So we're going down to that same line we originally inserted into, but now we're indexing at the end of that line. I'm going to add in the message of and more. If we insert it like that, our text box now reads inserted message and more and more and more. So by having those new line characters within the inserted string, they'll be placed on separate lines and displayed that way in the text entry box. To delete text from the text widget, use the delete method. If you pass it only one index, it'll delete the character at that index. So if I pass the index of 1.0, it'll delete the first character within my text box, which is this capital T. If you provide 2 indices, it'll delete the characters from the beginning index to just before that last index. So it's a non-inclusive delete. So if I use the index 1.0, which represents the beginning of that first line, and then I use the index 1.0 with the line end modifier, which represents the end of that first line, I'll delete everything up to that end of the first line. However, it will not delete the last character in that first line, which is the new line character. So you notice we still have 2 blank lines up here. If we want to include that new line character for deletion, we can add one more modifier to our index. So I'm going to delete everything from the beginning of my text box to the third line, use line end. So I'm going to be deleting the top 3 lines of my text box. And then I'm going to add one additional modifier here for +1 chars. So this will go down to the index at the end of this first line. It'll go 1 character beyond that, and that's because the delete method is non-inclusive, so it won't include the last character that's referenced here. in this index. I'm going to execute that. Now it deletes those top 3 lines and the new line character at the end of that third line as well. I can replace sections of text within my text widget by using the replace method. The replace method takes 2 indices. It takes the beginning and end of the section of text you want to replace. So I'm going to replace everything on the first line of text here. And then the third parameter it takes is the actual string you want to replace it with. So I'll now make the top line, instead of saying more and, it'll say this is the first line. This is basically the same as calling the delete command on that first line and then inserting the text in its place. As I mentioned before, the text widget is not a themed widget, and therefore it doesn't have the same state and inState methods that we saw with the entry widget. Instead, it has a state property which we can set to be disabled or normal by using the text.config method. So I'll set state equal to disabled. And now that my text field is disabled, I can no longer type text into it. Disabling a text widget also prevents other methods from programmatically modifying the text. So if I had tried to delete the text while it's currently disabled, so I'm going to try and delete everything out of my text field with 1.0 to the end. You notice it doesn't do anything because it's disabled. To re-enable the text field, I simply use that config method and reset my state back to normal.